Hi, my name is Francesca Zambello. I'm the artistic director, of the Washington National Opera, and that was Tiffany Choe singing Liu's aria, Tu che di Gel, Brava, accompanied by Chris Cano, who is the director of our K-Fritz Young Artist Program in Washington, as well as the director of the American Opera Initiative. I also just want to welcome my colleague, Timothy O'Leary, who's here in the front, the general director of our company, and we are thrilled, thank you. We are thrilled from the Washington National Opera to be back in this series. Thank you, Duke, thank you, Caroline. We haven't been here from WNO in a while. The last time we were here was with Philip Glass's Appomattox. So happy to be back here now, talking about Turandot. So I know a lot of you are always here when we do new works, and something is going to be new and very different about this. But also a lot of it is about celebrating the great things about Puccini and how we can present some of Puccini's works today. As many of you know, I know there's a lot of aficionados out there, but some who don't know, so just a little reminder about some of this. What you've just heard is basically the last bit of music that Puccini wrote. It is when Liu kills herself. Timur has a page of "Oh no, she's dead," the chorus says "Oh no, she's dead," and then, of course, Puccini died at that point and did not complete the opera. It was his last opera, and of course we think of it as an incredible chef-d'oeuvre. Even if you don't know this opera, everyone knows Nessun Dorma, the great soccer anthem that every tenor has sung, and even Aretha Franklin recorded it. So I would definitely not miss her recording because it was phenomenal when I heard it live. So let's just remind ourselves a little bit about the story before we get going. Turandot is an Italian verismo opera about a Chinese princess, which is based on a commedia dell'arte play, which took its subject matter from a Persian story of a Russian princess collected and published by a French folklorist, okay? So it is not exactly an authentic representation of Chinese culture. It also turns out to be a story that reinforces some very problematic stereotypes about China, but also about women. And we will talk much more about that as we move along. Especially for all of us, I love Puccini's works because he writes such great female characters. But anyway, when I started working on this, I didn't want our production to look at a very cliched version of China. But you can't take China out of this story any more than you can take women out of this story. Although Puccini had never been to China, he did track down some amazing Chinese folk tunes and anthems that appear throughout Turandot, including one that serves as her leitmotif. But we decided we wanted to situate our production in a China that is kind of a cultural crossroads, with people arriving and coming from many different places. And in a little bit, we'll show you some sketches and ideas from our designers, what we have planned. But so the visuals are, of course, so important with this piece as we think about it today. But the story is another. And one of the things that I find, and perhaps others might find, is that the ending is very problematic. You have a very proud and fiery princess who spends the entire opera saying no, right? Then Prince Kalaf comes, he ignores her no. An ending is written by Alfano, one of Puccini's students, and even though Kalaf ignores her no, he then plants a big old kiss on her against her will, and as a result, that's kind of an assault, we think now, she is suddenly transformed into this nice, magnanimous ruler, right? So now, interestingly, or I might even say conveniently, the ending that we are used to hearing, again, is not by Puccini. Since he died, he could not finish the score, and of course, Alfano took to the task of rewriting it. And I would never dream of us rewriting Puccini, but I would dream, now that 100 years have passed and the work is in public domain, about coming up with a new ending. And this seemed to be an opportunity where we could perhaps reconsider this incredible protagonist. So we will have every note of Puccini, but we have commissioned a new ending by Susan Sunhee Stanton, librettist, and Christopher Tin, composer. So I'd like to start by inviting our librettist up here, Emmy Award-winning writer of the TV show Succession. This is Susan Sunhee Stanton. Thank you, Susan. It's great that you're here. So I was familiar with some of Susan's work, but I have to also credit the wonderful playwright and librettist David Henry Wong, who is a close friend and has written works for us in Washington, who said you really should look at her material. And so I read her plays, and I thought they were great. And then I learned she wrote Succession. So I was like, oh my gosh. So I was thrilled to meet and to really talk about this piece. So would you mind just giving us a little overview how you approached this project initially?
Yeah, and so I thought a lot about, I think as a playwright, we think a lot about character. And so again, that like the politics of it is like he gives her a smooch and then she's transformed. And I thought a lot about who these people are, how she's so rigid but also that he sort of, earlier on, he sort of like says like, none shall sleep. He gives her his power again, and so it's really complicated. And I think about the impact of the death of Lou, and so I was just thinking about all these different sort of factors, and I thought, in a way, it's the first time that Calaf and Turandot are alone together, and so in a way, it's like allowing for a really complicated emotional scene between the two of them. And I think you probably were horrified. Like the first draft was very, very long because I wrote it as a full scene. I wanted all the different pieces, and then as we shared it, it was how to distill beat by beat, how to condense it, and let the music do the work that some of the original lines did. And so for me, it was really important to explore their characters, try to have a more satisfying and sort of psychologically more accurate feeling as a resolution for the play. So I think that was the process we went into it with.
You've said something that I think is really important for people to understand, is that when you write a libretto, you have to have this amazing skill to condense an emotion, a character, often through much shorter text, of course, than in a play. And I know that was for you a learning curve, but you did it well. And would you, without giving away everything, maybe just give people a bit of a synopsis about our last 20 minutes of the opera?
Not giving away everything. Okay.
Well, you can give away a lot. It's okay. This is like a friends and family group in the choir, so it's okay.
So I would think in some ways structurally it's similar, but emotionally it's different. And so I wanted, Lou is killed, his father goes away, and I think that I want to think about Calaf as being a changed man, where he's sort of finally realizing the consequences of his action, and so he's confronting Turandot, but he's also guilty himself. These are two people that have blood on their hands, and so it's kind of just like, look what you've done, well, like, look what you've done, and there's a sort of confronting between the two of them, but it also leads to, instead of being changed by a kiss, it sort of creates this moment where she finally talks about what happened. And I thought, it's not just some ancient ancestress that was defiled. I thought, like, Turandot's actions are so extreme, and so she finally sort of admits and relives that, she was raped. And it's a moment that she sort of says out loud in a way for the first time, and she's sort of able to purge that with him, and that's a big part of what she's able to let go. And then he gives her his name, and then once again she has the power and she's able to choose what to do with it, and I think similar to the older ending, in some ways she comes into it, and we've also killed the emperor, and so it's, there's a lot of sort of heaviness of this sort of the darkness into the light, which is a big motif in the opera. And so her, Lou has passed, her father has died, but it's a new dawn of Turandot and what kind of leader she wants to be, what kind of China she wants to rule. And so she chooses mercy, and there's strength in that. And so also for all of her subjects who rejoiced at the death of the Prince of Persia in the beginning of the opera are now also really changed by this sort of new era and sort of her leading by a certain amount of example with mercy. and kind of light and love leading the way, and even the most cynical of the ministers are also sort of surprised, and so it's sort of shepherding in this new dawn.
Thank you. So you're all going to have to be there May 11th and all of May to see this. I think there are some things that you touched on. I just want to, we often don't realize that in Questa Regia, Turandot does speak about rape, and often that's not really pointed out. Of course, I don't know how much to draw something like that out, but it is important. That is what's changed her. And when she says it, she's talking in a way obliquely. Could it be her, or could it have been her mother, Lu Ling, her ancestress? And that, in a way, was a clue for us, but also the whole fact of that she accepts in seeing Liu's death and understands love, but also mercy. What does mercy mean? And how it can transform a society. And for me, that certainly was one of the most important things that you brought to this, because to create an empowered, yet kind and good woman leader was important, I think, for all of us on the team to bring this forward. Would you?
Oh, absolutely. I think you're right. I think witnessing the death of Lu and this moment of sort of sacrifice and love, I think shocked her. I mean, I think she was like, what woman would do that? Like, in a way, like, what is a foolish girl? But actually, she's changed by witnessing this act, and she sort of realizes what it all means, and how complicated it is, and how beautiful.
And she also does something I think very important, which some of the libretto is in the program, is that she says that Liu's burial, that she should be buried next to the emperor. Again, creating a society, trying to create one without class, not sending the body off to somewhere in Siberia. And so I think it's really, to me, that's one of the most touching moments. But I'd love to talk a little bit about the visuals and invite our colleagues up here. Please welcome Linda Choe, the costume designer, and Wilson Chin, set designer. Hi, gang. It's good to see you all. So I'm sure some of you know this, but it's very interesting. When you prepare a production, you often are doing it like way in advance for an opera house. In this case, we started talking about it probably about a year ago, and many companies actually, it might be 3 years out. I feel pretty good that we kind of connected after the pandemic and got going and started talking about it and tried to figure out this world. I'd love to start a little bit with a set, and just if you might talk about inspirations before we share some images.
Sure. We knew with this production we wanted to strip away any kind of like exoticism from it, but while still keeping the kind of spectacle and epic, and also going back to the music and the words. We know that this is like a dictatorship. This is a brutal place, beheadings, forced marriages. So we looked to lots of kind of, in our history, 20th century dictatorships. We looked at, like Germany, Italy, China. We looked at, like what the architecture of totalitarianism looks like. And we also kind of came up with this idea of it's an aging dictator, and we want to represent a world that kind of also feels like this crumbling industrial society with like huge class, like the whole chorus are all of these peasants who, are underneath the ruling class. So our design is based on a lot of these kind of iconic looks of 20th century dictatorships.
And Linda, we did mention the sort of cross-culture aspects of it. Historically, Beijing was at crossroads for thousands of years, where cultures came from all over, which also inspired us. And I know you helped us sort of figure out the notion of the different groups who ended up there following their leaders.
Yes, so in our early conversations, we talked about 1950s, you talked about a lot of things, but what I sort of seized upon was fascism, and then refugees. And I was trying to puzzle in my head, like, what would make sense? Like, who are these refugees, and how did they get there, and where are they from? And also considering that a modern chorus is made of many different races at Washington National Opera, and how do we reconcile all the different races that we see the faces on stage? And so, in my mind, all of the different princes that came to woo and try their luck and solve the riddles, they came with their retinue of people. And then when their prince was beheaded, they were abandoned there. So that's why there are all these different countries that are represented. So we tried to sort of show a flavor of these different countries that are adjacent to China and their groups. And at the beginning, when you see the Prince of Persia come and try his luck, and he is beheaded, you see the future refugees, his little group that will eventually be abandoned there and have to eke out a living.
So I'm going to share some of these images, may I? Wilson, I'd love for you to talk about them. Again, this is a model. This is not the stage, so of course it's, this is what things are constructed from. So here we go. So the opening, we start in a kind of the office of the ministers.
Yeah, it's deeply bureaucratic, tons of paperwork. So it's an office, and they're just they're overwhelmed.
And then we go to the exterior, to the square.
Yeah, it's very much like a factory, and with lots of layers, levels, so that you see the class struggles. You see the ruling class above, all the peasants below. They're all working. It's this, also when you talk about industrialization, then you start talking about climate change. You start talking about refugee, forced migration. It's all kind of lightly hinted at throughout our production.
Again, this is, of course, the moon, as Susan said, the moon and the sun play an enormous element in the piece. I'm sorry we're not performing on April 8th, but of course the moon is a super important protagonist in the piece, because the piece does move from darkness to light. So this is a representation of the moon.
There's going to be a whole layer of projection. There's a projection designer on our show. So behind the whole set is going to be an abstract world where we show kind of a moon. It could be interpreted as an eclipse. So it's like the sun is being blocked by something. So it's a cold world. But then on top of the set, we're also layering projections to kind of create this world that is alive and has emotion. This is the end of towards the end. We have a guillotine. This is a world in which beheadings happen in.
Well, it actually appears in the first act and in the end, but I'm thinking of it in order here, because the guillotine, the executioner, is such an important character in this. We then go to the riddle scene.
This is the riddle scene, so this is like a big palace scene, and we have this big factory wall. When we looked at a lot of these dictatorship architectures, it's all about scale and having this massive thing that kind of lords over everyone. So this was us creating that look.
And then the third act, we go to Nessun Dorma, where people are living outside.
Yeah, and I mean, this is very projection heavy right now. It's a very cool look. We're going from this kind of eternal night to, at the end of the play, when kind of an awakening happens. Maybe that's the first time we see sunlight. That's the first time we feel warmth. So the world kind of, through light and warmth, kind of opens up and transforms.
You can see it starting to warm up here. And then at the end, we have a big scene where, of course, we destroy the guillotine.
We're still working on if we can get fire. But, there's a dismantling of the old regime and kind of starting something new again.
Great. So moving to some of the costumes, Linda.
All right. So this is for the riddle scene. Everyone will be in a sea of red, so they put on a ceremonial piece for the riddle scenes, and Turandot is in this gown that has some religious flavor to it, and maybe a little Handmaid's Tale. All right. And then our refugees, so Timur and Liu, they are in clothes that, they've had to scavenge and keep through the years. And they're a little beaten down but warm. And I'll talk more about the colors and the groups as we move forward. Okay, so these uniforms, I looked at Russian uniforms, I looked at North Korea, I looked at Chinese communist uniforms, and our first pass, we're like, there's something missing. In the writing, there's all of that, all the rich source material that Francesca was talking about with the fables and all the different cultural references, and we just needed something that sort of lifted it from this literal like sort of fascist costume. So we added a layer of the ancient Chinese uniform, battle uniforms. So you'll see these sort of padded in the tradition of like Chinese peasant for warmth and for protection, they would do this quilting. So there are aspects of that on all the uniforms to sort of blend some of the traditions and the modern uniforms.
We also thought that in the palace, everyone who is a guard or who works there is a woman or a young girl.
Yes.
And so here you can see some of the women guards.
And supers. And again, the little drawings on the side are the red elements that they'll put on for the riddle scene.
But this mix of ancient Chinese, kind of that padding with over the uniforms.
Yeah. And then
the ministers. Puccini does call, and I don't love saying their names, Ping, Pang, and Pong, because it does have a sort of always a vaguely embarrassing racist feeling to it. But what's interesting is Puccini calls them three ministers. He gives them each a job. And so that was important to us to distinguish, one's a cook, one's a bureaucrat. And then executioner.
Who was also a female. And in my design, it was like, what would be blood-friendly? And so that is sort of like a raincoat. Okay, so again, these are the groupings of the different countries and the refugees that came with their prince. And as you can see, all of the uniforms were a sea of gray, and then the refugees will all be in sepia and brown tones. And instead of like dirt distressing, I wanted to do something a little more poetic, so it'll be ombre in sort of a dark to light painting treatment. That's it.
Great, that's it. So that's what it looks like. That's what the story is. What does it sound like? So just a brief story, if I may, before introducing Christopher Tin. My wife Faith is here tonight, and so our son one day I heard through his door this music that was orchestral, symphonic, and he's really in love with football, so I was very surprised to be hearing this music, and I thought, what is going on? And so I'm not even sure if I went and asked you, Faith, but I was like, what is he listening to? Anyway, so I after knocking 50 times, go in his room. He's 12 at this point, and he is playing a video game, like Minecraft, although not Minecraft, Commander something or other.
Civilization 6.
Civilization 6, thank you, great. And so I learned that was Christopher Tin's music. So Christopher, please come join us. Then I started Googling him and realized he had this, of course, several Grammy Awards on his shelf. a classical education about music, incredible compositions, choral compositions, which I think is very important in opera, and an opera like Turandot where there's chorus, a lot of vocal writing that I listened to that was really singable and melodic, and I was like, ooh, I want to meet him. So I wrote him a letter to Hollywood, Christopher Tin Hollywood, and said, could we meet up? I'm working in San Francisco. And so here we are. Did you know Turandot that well before we began this?
I only knew Nessun Dorma, if I'm perfectly honest with you. I mean, you know, opera is one of these things that I had on my bucket list forever, but I was always terrified of writing an opera because everyone I've talked to about it says it will consume your life for 2 years straight. You will be able to do nothing else but write this opera. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I'm not ready for that yet. But when the opportunity to work with Francesca arrived in my inbox, I of course said yes. And so I flew up to San Francisco and we met. You were directing the Ring Cycle over there. And you said, what do you want to write about in opera? And I said, I have no idea. And this was prior to the pandemic also, by the way. And so I think, you know, we sort of went our separate ways and just sort of like talked about a few ideas. And then you mentioned this as a possibility. And I said, oh, I want to do that. Because first of all, it's only 18 minutes of music, so it's not going to take 2 years of my life to write. And secondly, as a first-time opera composer, you don't often get an orchestra and chorus and soloists of this magnitude. It's usually, you know, like chamber orchestra, 5 singers, no chorus, you know, it's pretty spare. But this is Turandot, and I get to write for these singers, right? And so I flipped out at this opportunity, and I immediately started listening to the opera, because I didn't really know it at the time. But it's been, you know, that CD has not left my car, you know, stereos since like 2019, I think, when we came up with this idea. You know, I've just immersed myself in this world with great pleasure and love and excitement ever since our meeting.
Well, yes, it is a good way to start. I mean, it is a little daunting, though, to say to somebody following on Puccini, but because you were a little naive, you said, okay, I guess.
It's one of these damned if you do, damned if you don't things, you know? I mean, you know, okay, what helps is that I'm not actually replacing any Puccini, of course, right? No way, I would never do that. What helps is also that the Franco Alfano ending has not aged terribly well, and it also helps that other composers have taken a stab at finishing this opera as well. So, you know, I'm just one of many composers, I guess, finishing this great masterwork of an opera.
So we then sat down, also with our dramaturg, Kelly Rourke, who's been invaluable in the process, with Christopher, and then, you know, like I said, I called David Henry, and he said, Susan, and then we, I think, sat down around a table and on Zoom, and I think so many of us, you know, Zoom became our collaboration thing, as frustrating it is, and then, but we worked our way to this. And so I thought what would be fun for everybody, before we hear excerpts of the finale, if I could invite Christopher Tin, who is also a wonderful pianist, although he'll be embarrassed. No, he's not. Okay, fine, I lied. To talk a little bit about the process, because I do have to say it was important to myself and to Tim when we talked about commissioning someone for this, that we didn't want it to feel like a completely different world orally. We wanted to pay homage to Puccini. So that was sort of the one brief for the music, and then, of course, the brief for the words. So if you would talk a little about the process and come on up to the keyboard and give us a demo. And then we're going to hear some excerpts from the finale.
All right, no pressure at all, right? Okay, so the thing about the other endings that people have written is they don't actually sound a lot like Puccini. Even Franco Alfano, who was one of his contemporaries, didn't want to embrace Puccini's style. The best way I can describe Puccini is it's just hit melody after hit melody, man. So, as Francesca mentioned, I have a side gig when I'm not finishing the great masterworks of the classical canon, and that is I score films and video games. And so the rhetoric of Puccini was already in my DNA, in a way. I'm a very melodic composer. I write very sort of easy to parse musical structures, in a way. And I think that made me a pretty good fit for this job, if I may say so, in that I didn't have to do a lot that was different from what I naturally would have done to finish this opera off. Nevertheless, it's still an enormously daunting task, because there is no other commission that you can accept where you already have 100 years of people's opinions about what you should write before you even start to write any of it. And let me tell you, everyone comes out of the woodwork to tell you what they think you should do. I had everyone from opera critics to Puccini scholars writing to me, saying, you know, how are you going to tackle this? What are you going to do? Are you going to use hexaphonic chords? Are you going to use, you know, pandiatonicism? Are you going to use melodic tinta? You know, all of this stuff got thrown at me early on, and ultimately, the only way that I could proceed was to kind of tune it all out in a way and just invest heavily on what I knew that I could do myself, which was write Christopher Tin music. Because at the end of the day, no one wants to hear second-rate Puccini, but somebody might want to hear first-rate Christopher Tin, right? So with that in mind, it becomes a little less of a daunting task. Now, fortunately, I was handed a really fantastic libretto by Susan, and not only was it a great libretto, but Susan made it very easy to set to music because she used very condensed language, which sits very well, you know, for the voice and for composing. But what really helped was when I was able to sit down with Susan over a Zoom call and have her tell me, okay, these 4 words, even though it's just 4 words, this is the entire subtext of what's going on here. And so she gave me a line-by-line roadmap of how to tackle emotionally the development of these characters. So the task then falls on my shoulders to tell that development in music. Now, how do you tell the development of characters in music? Well, you use motivic development. So I'm sure everyone here knows what a leitmotif is. We have a very opera-heavy audience, so I know you all know that it's a theme that recurs throughout the course of a dramatic work. Puccini, melodic mastermind that he is, left tons of material for me to work with. So one such example is the axe motif. This is how the opera starts off. That's the axe falling down, right? That's what it's meant to sound like. Now what's great about that motif is it's a little bit ambiguous, and so I could actually bring it back in many guises. And each time I bring it back, I can kind of change it a little so that it actually reflects sort of the emotional subtext or the character development of what's going on stage at the time. So here's another example. You're going to hear an aria that I wrote based on a sketch that Puccini left. And you're going to hear that in just a minute. But at the end of the aria, I take that axe motif and I treat it like this. A triumphant feel at first because she's singing about how she's risen from the ashes and has just, you know, just taken control of her destiny now. But there's a bit of an element of sort of the sinister to it as well, you know. But later on, after we learn that Turandot has decided to rule with mercy, we hear that motif again, but I change it a little more so that it sort of goes from surprise to uncertainty to optimism, right? So you can sort of like change the harmonization of things as they go along to sort of suggest the development of the characters and sort of advance the plot. Now, there is a big kiss moment in the opera. And what is particularly interesting is that Puccini himself didn't really know how to justify the love between Calaf and Turandot. And in his sketches, in fact, in conversations with his friends, he said, I don't know how to end this. The only thing I can think of is to write the greatest love duet known to man, and the music will sell the audience, and they will believe that these two people are in love. And of course, he dies before he can do that. So what do I have to do? No, in all seriousness, though, in his sketches, he wrote Poi Tristano, which meant, and now Tristan, meaning like, he was a fan of Wagner, and the only way he could think of to justify the love was to elevate this love story to sort of monomythic properties, right? So I've taken that axe motif, and I've done it like this now, and I use it as sort of a Librettist-esque build-up to the big kiss moment. So it goes like this. Turandot to show her evolution as well, but Calaf is the other guy who needs to be developed in a way, right? So what I've done with him is his most signature tune is, of course, Nessun Dorma. And I've always thought of Nessun Dorma as, his big heroic moment, but also the moment where he reveals that he's just kind of a giant jerk, and that he knows that no one's going to guess his name, and he's just sort of like reveling in it, None shall know my name. I got this, guys, right? Like, it's a big moment of sort of toxic masculinity. So in order for Turandot to actually fall in love with Calaf, she needs to see that Calaf has changed in a way. And so the way I did that is I quote Nessun Dorma in the big kiss moment. Now, in the Alfano ending, the kiss is actually just a quick little thing that happens very, very quickly. It's almost a throwaway musical moment in a way. I do it a little differently. I'm going to sing it for you now. Apologies for what you're about to hear. It goes like this. Taken his big moment of, like gloating and just being a jerk. And now I've taken it and turned it into his most vulnerable moment where he essentially puts his life into her hands. And by doing that, he's now telling everyone, whereas before he thought that love was something that needed to be conquered, now he understands that love is something that you need to be willing to die for. And that's how I show Calaf's development. And so there are other little gimmicks that I do, like Puccini left no shortage of melodies, like the opening of the opera. That motif, right? That sort of shows China in disarray. But towards the end, when Turandot, finds her footing and she starts saying, our new China will be one based on mercy, I actually flip the melody upside down. It goes like this. So I do little games like that all over the place, taking little melodic fragments of his, maybe like turning them upside down, making them major, etc., etc. I do this all to show the progression of their characters, but also to lend structural cohesion to the entire work, because I want my ending to fit very neatly with Puccini's, right? It may not sound 100% like Puccini. I'm not trying to be second-rate Puccini here, but I want enough elements to be shared in common between mine and the great maestro's music such that it fits together well and solves this problem that sort of existed for the last 100 years of the Alfano ending not being a good part of this. So that's kind of how I did it.
Okay. To hear some excerpts from the finale. The libretto sections are actually, because it is in Italian, are in your program if you want to follow along. And so we will be hearing excerpts, and we're going to hear two of our K-Fritz young artists. Teresa Perrotta will be singing Turandot, and Sahel Salam will be singing Kalaf, and they will be accompanied by Cano coming back. And we can go sit over there and enjoy this. Come on out, everybody. so happy that you were here with us tonight. Of course, we want you all to come see us in Washington, D.C., the Kennedy Center, Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center, opening May 11th, running through May 25th. Thank you, Tim. May is a phenomenal month to be in Washington. The monuments are spectacular, the gardens are beautiful, the restaurants are good, the Acela is usually on time. And so it would be a pleasure for all of us to welcome you. I know that on behalf of Tim and myself, we want to thank the many generous patrons who are helping us do this production, particularly the Cohens who are here this evening. Thank you very much for helping us. And to all of my colleagues who are here with us tonight. And I think we'll probably just hang around over here a little bit if people want to ask any questions or anything like that. We want to thank our friends here at the Guggenheim, Duke and Caroline. Thank you so much for having us. We'll see you in DC. Thank you very much.